welcome. So happy to have you here today. My name is Katie Hazard, and I am the Associate Director of Art Management for Burning Man, which means I run the art department. Like, who knew that could be your job, right? It's simultaneously challenging and gratifying, and I really count my lucky stars every day that I get to do this amazing work. So I'm really excited to be here with today and to welcome you to ArtSpeaks. If you're new to this series, this is Burning Man Project's new artist storytelling series, which we launched earlier this summer. And we've been having a great time with it so far, getting lots of good feedback, and we're just loving having this opportunity to showcase some really exceptional Burning Man artists. So as folks are joining, please pop a hello in the chat and let us know where you're calling in from. That's one of the cool parts about being on Zoom like this, is that we can come together from all around the world. So it's fun to see already in the chat notes about where people are coming from. So just a couple tips about Zoom and this being a webinar. Please use the chat as much as you like. It's a great place to stay engaged, share your thoughts, cheer on the artists. If you have questions, put those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and then we can queue those up for the live Q&A portion of our event. So today's program, how will it go? The format is that we have 3 projects or artists represented. Each will share a video about 5 minutes long, and that video will have some background and some stories about their projects. And then we'll open it up to a live Q&A with the artists. So as folks are, as you're watching these videos, as questions come up, like I said, put them in that Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can when we get to that portion. So our theme for today is art for social change. So I was thinking about this and thinking how, sometimes art can be an escape, and with the world being what it is right now, we do need some of that, but we also really need some conversation around how creativity can be a motivating force for change. One of the things I love about Burners is this beautiful blend between idealism and practicality or realism. It takes a certain type to dream up most of what you see at Burning Man, but these folks don't just dream this up, they also do it. They are practical and logistical, while at the same time, imaginative and open-minded. So this especially comes across in the art on the playa, these wild and wonderful concepts that come to life in physical, concrete ways. And much of this art has a message. You could say that all art conveys some kind of message, that every artist is expressing something or making some kind of statement through their work. For some, when I've been making work before, sometimes I don't even know what that message is until I'm finished with the work. Some work creates, kind of elicits emotion, some art tells a story, but some art is built expressly to convey a message and be a call to action. So that's what we get to dive into today. Artists whose work serve as a platform to generate awareness and inspire action around important causes. And Black Rock City is a great venue for this, with upwards of 80,000 people who are out of their normal environment and often more open to new ideas. Messages can really be amplified there. Art can be a driver for social change. And there's a history, of course, in Black Rock City of art for social change. Just to set some context without going too far down it, I want to touch quickly on a few of those issues and corresponding artworks that have come before. One area we see some work around is racial equity and social justice. A piece I especially loved was All Power to All People by Hank Willis Thomas. A couple years back, it was this upraised fist on top of an Afro pick. Really, really strong piece. And up as recently as just last week, we just published something in the Burning Man Journal this week. There's a group of artists in Emeryville, California, who created a project called Neon Voices. That's giant Black Lives Matter in LED, but it's made to look like neon. But the cool part is that they open sourced it, so you can do it where you live too. We are just posting the link to that article in chat for more info about that. We also see art that has political messaging. Most recently, the Fergusons brought Let Us Pray, P-R-E-Y, that was a commentary on that. And then over the years, there's been a lot about environmental messaging, thinking about Crude Awakening or Big Rig Jig. These were both commentaries on our excessive use of oil. There have been a couple projects about trash in the ocean, like Jar of Sand and Dinner with a Whale, that's coming to the next Black Rock City. There was a really well-loved piece in 2019 called Awfuls, Gas, and Snack that was a kind of humorous take on a post-fossil fuel dystopian future. So there's a lot around that. And honestly, there are too many things for me to name here. Like for folks who are here in the program with us, it'd be fun for you to chime in and if you've been to Burning Man, and use the chat to share art projects you can think of that had a message around social change. And the last category I wanted to touch on was protests against capitalism or consumerism. In the very early days, there was the Helco Project, there was Burn Wall Street. We had an artist from Amsterdam, Dodara, who created an alternate form of currency that was based on love. There's a cool article about that. We can post a link in the chat. And then one that I really love, maybe some of you know, is Reverend Billy and his Church of Stop Shopping. He does this performance art and radical activism. He's got a persona of an evangelical preacher. So he goes preaching and singing with his choir, basically against the evils of consumerism and the racism of sweatshop labor. He's great. He's doing a radio show now. We can put the link to that in the chat too. So, I mean, really, there are too many to name over all the years that we've been in the desert making art. So one last one I want to mention is the Billion Bunny March. Some of you have maybe seen this at Burning Man. It's hundreds of folks dressed up like bunnies, like rabbits, in a giant demonstration or protest marching across Black Rock City. It started in San Francisco as a way to criticize political partisanship, just to kind of demonstrate how ridiculous it is to be so two-sided, which still is very familiar today, unfortunately. And they also have an environmental message. Kind of one of the grievances of the bunnies is that the humans are messing up the planet. So these bunnies are basically protesting humanity, kind of revealing how ridiculous it is to have these extremist views. And in a way, we can kind of see our togetherness by abandoning it for something else altogether. So what you really see with the Billion Bunny March and a couple other of these projects is some level of absurdity. There's this kind of brilliant method of using humor as a way in. You can kind of draw people in that way so that they're more receptive to the message. So it's really part of Burning Man's history and roots, going back to the Cacophony Society and our tradition of pranksterism. And there are lots of sort of absurdist marches like this still happening in Black Rock City. So as you listen to the stories from today's artists, I always like to remind folks that Burning Man is all about participation. There are no spectators. So as you hear these stories, remember that you too can be involved. Is there something on your mind or on your heart that you want to share with the wider world? Everyone is welcome to bring art to Black Rock City. So without further ado, let's get into it. Oh, I like someone wrote bunnies, fake news in the chat. So I'm excited to introduce our first artist today. His name is Bardia Saeedy, and he's coming to us live from Norfolk, Virginia. Bardia is a full-time artist and has been creating interactive art installations as a communications tool in social settings since 2011. He has exhibited in 4 Figment DC events, 4 Artomatic events, various regional burns, and other local events. His last 2 installations were installed at the Hirshhorn Museum and the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian. He worked with Homeless in DC for 2 years to raise awareness about homelessness through interactive art. And what I found especially cool, he organized a small burn in the northern mountains of Iran in 2007. So I came to know Bardia through his 2018 Burning Man honorarium project called iSheep. He was fantastic to work with, and I'm really happy to have somebody with us that has such an extensive background in art for social change. So welcome, Bardia.
Hi everyone. I'm pleased to be here. The sheep send their regards. They wanted to be here, but I think they had prior engagements. Anyway, this is exciting. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right, let's check out your video.
iSheep were fun and games until they weren't. My name is Bardia Saeedy, and I was the lead artist for iSheep, which was a Burning Man honorarium project in 2018. So iSheep were these life-size sheep that were on wheels, and you could roll them, push them around, roll them around, and ride on them if you got their consent. They had touch sensors all over their body and could detect people touching them, hugging them, riding them. They would basically take you through a series of steps to then allow you to ride them. We recruited 13 volunteers. There were 13 sheep to be the voice of the sheep, each sheep, and gave him some basic guidelines to basically guide people to come and hug the sheep, pet the sheep, and then after enough petting, you could ride them. But if you rode them or touched them before their consent, they would create havoc. The idea of the sheep came to me almost like instantaneously. I was already thinking about building some sheep for a brewery that was supposedly farm to table. And so that was in my mind, building sheep. And then I heard about the theme, Burning Man theme in 2018, which was iRobot. And immediately I said to myself, oh, iSheep, I'm going to build iSheep. I had already worked on, in the past years, a few years before that, worked on some project that grappled with some social issues. Namely, for like few years, I worked on a project with the homeless in DC. Then 2017, I worked on a project about immigration. And I had also worked on a couple of projects regarding the Me Too movement and the consent issue. Personally, I was grappling with the issue of consent and was in the back of my mind, actually front of my mind at the time, specifically because of my dealings with women as a teenager in my home country, Iran. And I had already worked on a couple of installations with that issue in mind. So as soon as I decided to do iSheep, I knew it was going to be about consent. So when I was starting to make the sheep, I had no idea how much people loved sheep. So that was the first interaction that I would see when people would come close to the sheep. They just smiles all over their face. And of course, immediately or soon after, the sheep would talk to them, and that just like, whoop, took them to the next level. And people would just like smile and laugh. So it was all fun, you know, they would come and they would listen to the sheep. It was just funny. It was just, everything was funny until you did something that wasn't funny anymore. You basically did something without their permission. When we were thinking about like all of this, when we were building the sheep, there was a sort of a large community of volunteers that were part of the conversation as to what it means, what are we doing, and what is the whole issue of consent. And we were like really careful to walk the line of fun and games on a very, very serious issue. I remember we had a lot of conversations, heated conversations about what the sheep would do and all of that. Being burners, some of the people wanted the sheep to go all the way and give consent for everything. And some people, of course, didn't want that. And my job was to facilitate the conversation as to what would the sheep do. And after a fairly long time, couple of months, we decided that there is a line. And the sheep are not going to cross that line. And that, I think, was most important decision. And it was basically the main experience of the sheep, that it was funny, and you had all these interactions. Just riding the sheep was so much fun, pushing them around was so much fun. People would race, but until a point. And when you cross that line, then the sheep would basically say really nasty things to you and try to embarrass you. And that's where the line was, and that's where basically the project succeeded. Giving a speech or writing a book about a contemporary social issue can obviously be very powerful, educational, moving, life-changing, and perhaps even motivation or inspiration behind the movement. In my opinion, art isn't there to do that. Art cannot be a speech. What I don't like for my art to be a speech nor a slogan. Art can be a reminder that perhaps tickles your senses. If it's successful, it seeps into your subconscious. Art is more like a poem than a manifesto.
Wow, I love that. First, it's so fun to see those sheep. I mean, people absolutely love that project on Playa, but I really love how you ended there with, what was it? How did you phrase it? Art is a poem and not a manifesto. I like that a lot. And I love how you were able to take what is a really serious issue, like thinking about how you and your crew talked about it all that time, but use playfulness and humor instead of shaming to get the message across. So really fun. Thanks so much, Bardia. The next artist we have here today with us is Rebekah Waites, who is joining us live from Los Angeles. Rebekah is an award-winning artist whose work has been experienced by thousands. She's created several major installations for Burning Man. Some of you may remember the Church Trap in 2013. That was a really well-loved piece. She created an organ for the Man Base in 2015, and then Singularity in 2018. She also served on the Global Art Grant Review Committee for a couple years. And besides creating art for Burning Man, Rebekah is also an accomplished painter, and she works in the film and television industry as an art director. And I first got to know her when she brought Church Trap, which was such a clever conceptual piece, also super interactive. And I'm really glad she can be here with us today. Hi, Rebekah, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me, Katie. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. You're there in your new studio, huh?
Yes, I am. My new little workspace.
That's great, especially for Los Angeles. It can't be that easy to have. Yeah, cool. Well, let's go ahead and watch the video that Rebekah kindly made for us about Singularity.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rebekah Waites. I am a mixed media and installation artist living in Los Angeles, California. In 2013, myself and the Church Trap crew brought Church Trap to Burning Man. And in 2018, the Singularity crew and myself brought Singularity to the Playa. I'm really excited to be here today and looking forward to telling you about Singularity and what inspires me to make interactive art. I came up with the idea for Singularity a few years ago when I was battling my own depression. I actually literally came up with the idea with the therapist while I was going through my sessions. I became very interested in how the brain works during depression or traumatic events and how we think of things over and over and over again on an infinite loop. And I'm also very interested, or at the time, I'm still interested, but at the time came up with the idea of, really inspired by how black holes work, or the theory behind black holes, in that the theory is that at the center of a black hole is a point of singularity, and that the idea is that the gravitational pull is so intense that it creates like this infinite worm loop, or wormhole, if you will. And I just kind of put the two and two together and was just like, oh, these kind of things, these actually match up and they kind of work in the same way. At the time, just before that, I was my crew and I were digging through a collapsed barn, salvaging reclaimed lumber, because we were bringing the Church Trap organ back to the Man Base in 2015, and found this really big antique bird cage, and it was collapsed in the barn. And I'd held on to it for a long time, and I knew I was going to do something with it. And it wasn't until in the therapist's office that I kind of was coming up with the idea, because I felt like I was very trapped in a cage, and it became like this symbol at the time for what I was going through. I really feel like, now especially the idea behind Singularity is even more relevant with everything going on right now. A lot of folks, myself included, my loved ones and other family members, are having a really difficult time in coping with the pandemic, with our political climate and all of that stuff. I kind of wish it was still around today for folks to enjoy, because I think that coming out of what we're going through, and when we do, that piece would be very, very well received and welcomed again. I might have to bring it back. You know, I make the art that I make has become almost like a social activist kind of artwork. You know, Church Trap was about dogma and poking fun at how religion is a trap, and how ideas behind religion are used as tools to pull people in. With Singularity, you know, like I said, I was diving into my own, you know, battles with depression, and how, you know, using art and coping with your own, you know, issues or whatever, how that is a very useful tool to get through what we're going through. I just feel like, you know, right now, and especially once we come out of COVID, that, you know, more than ever, making community engagement art pieces is going to become even more important than ever. I personally have been having a difficult time, you know, feeling inspired, or at least at the beginning of the pandemic. Lately, I've dived back into my idea behind Pandora's Box, which is tackling addiction and homelessness. My brother suffers from bipolar disorder, and he has been a drug addict and living on and off the streets for years, and he's definitely the inspiration behind that piece. And he and some other folks that I love ended up back on drugs again because of the pressures of the pandemic, and I don't feel like that was something that, you know, people really thought about and really gave any time or consideration to, with folks falling off the radar because they weren't able to deal with the pressures of what was going on. I feel like, you know, making these art pieces and expressing ourselves in those ways is going to be more important than ever. I'm hoping that next year that I'll have a series of pieces done. I've already started a couple maquettes of the art piece, which I'm excited about. I've been collecting pill bottles and pills for the last year or so, and I've got a bunch of ideas that are just like ready to just pour out of my head. But you'll have to wait for those, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you all after the show. And I just want to thank Burning Man and Katie and the ArtSpeaks team for inviting me to come and talk to you all today. And yeah, I look forward to meeting you all. See you in a bit. Bye-bye.
Rebekah, thank you so much for being so vulnerable. Like, it's so brave of you, really, to speak about your own mental health. And I'm sure your therapist didn't quite expect to see that coming. She probably never had anything quite so big and interesting come out of a session. That's pretty cool. I also really like the way you can make that alignment between the kind of spiraling mind that happens in depression with black holes. Like, that's a cool thing to bring those two things together. But yeah, all of this is so relevant right now, given the rough state of the world. So I really appreciate your sharing about it. And I'm excited to see what comes next with Pandora's Box. So thanks so much. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Don Kennell and Lisa Adler here with us today. Lisa and Don are based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they have been partners and collaborators since the 90s. Their work is inspired by animals and the natural environment, and they've installed their art in public spaces all across the United States. They love to connect with communities where their sculptures are located. And Don focuses on the design drawings and leads the fabrication crews, while Lisa focuses on community engagement. Their company DKLA Design has a mission to activate public space while bringing nature into human consciousness. So they raise awareness about the profound relationship that humans have with animals and how our carbon footprint impacts habitat loss. You likely know them from their 2018 project, Longview, a polar bear stands in the desert. It was an incredible project. Hard to believe that was their first year ever in Black Rock City. And it looked like a way bigger version of this guy. So I'm so happy to have you guys here today. Welcome, Lisa and Don.
Hi, thanks so much for having us. We're coming to you live from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Yes, thank you for inviting us, and for everybody who has been on Edna's journey. The polar bear is named after Don's mother, Edna. So the journey has been tremendous.
why was it named after your mother? I don't think I knew that part ever.
When we were at Burning Man, everyone came up to me and was like, what is the bear's name? And usually I don't really name the sculptures after a person or anything like that, but I got to thinking about what this bear symbolized as kind of a fierce protector. We definitely conceived of it as a female bear because mama bears are badass. And I got to thinking of the most badass woman I know in my life, maybe besides this one, is my mom, Edna.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, she was really quite an impressive woman, a firecracker. And, you know, Dawn is 6'6" and a twin. Edna was like 5'3".
Oh my goodness.
She had like 13 pounds of weight.
Oh, that poor lady. Oh, well, that's cool to hear more about that part of it. Thank you. And I'm excited to see the video that you have prepared for us. So let's go ahead and roll that.
Welcome, friends, to Lumen Nature, a place where humans and animals of all kinds meet to celebrate the wondrous diversity of life on our planet.
We create these super theatrical situations with these large-scale animals that are kind of unbelievably rendered in car hoods. And what that does is it connects with people on a number of levels. So there's kind of an emotional response to the scale that creates a real kind of quicker pulse. There's kind of an intellectual response when the materials and the location, like for instance, finding a polar bear in the desert, when those things come together. And then there's just kind of a real heart-centered response of, you know, we render these animals with a lot of care and a lot of love, and that comes through, and people really get that, and people love animals, and so we're able to kind of build on this innate connection that people have with animals. And it creates a real dynamic situation where they forget their sort of inner voice, their daily moment. They have to kind of deal with this big creature in this new environment. And that is this real fertile, imaginative moment. And that's really kind of what we're going for in our work. And it kind of places the viewer in the center of the drama. They become actors. They have to kind of respond. And so we're sort of trying to activate our audience.
The sculpture debuted at Black Rock City, and part of the vision of that work is, you know, a giant polar bear made out of car hoods, is to draw attention to the connection between our carbon footprint and habitat loss. So when we were at Burning Man, we partnered with a solar energy company that powered the lights, powered the projections, which was super exciting. And then when the polar bear left Burning Man, it came to San Francisco and was a public art event for the Global Climate Action Summit, which was an international gathering of business and government leaders to commit to reducing carbon emissions.
It's a real testimony to the commitment of both, I mean, coming from our company, but also the people that we collaborate with to bring the bear around.
Yeah.
Because we've set this sculpture up in some very unusual places, some very demanding locations, and it's not been easy. It's been a lot of work, but we certainly want to see the bear get out there into the world, but so do a lot of other people, and they have stepped up and made this happen over and over again. And I think it's just kind of a testimony to the hunger in this moment right now for a piece that reflects these values of love of our planet and love of this species, and the recognition that now is the time to do something. And people, whether it's the zoo or the Beakerhead folks in Calgary or the city of San Francisco, the governor's office in California, people want to do something. And they understand that this sculpture is a public symbol for that value, for those values. And they want to make it happen. They want to be part of it. And it's super exciting for us to find ourselves having created something that means so much to other people.
Car parts are everywhere in the landscape, you know, and taking that material and transforming it into a piece of art kind of mirrors that process of transformation that we all are in need of, you know, just that we do need to transform our world, I think, in order to survive. And so, you know, the process of taking the material and transforming it into something very different.
To a symbol of nature.
Right. And that is this.
And a protector of space. It's
a process of transformation that, you know, while we're doing it in this very particular way, transforming garbage into art, it's that process that really needs to be mirrored all around us. Yeah. A big part of our work is that question, you know, how is community formed and how do people kind of come together? And the thing about space is that space really makes certain things possible, or it makes certain things impossible. And so if you're asking yourself, you know, how does a community come together? You know, you have to look at space and say, well, is there any place where people can come together? Is there any reason why people would want to congregate? You know, and if we create something where, yeah, I want to go get my picture taken with that polar bear, then you create all of these people who have the same picture, you know, they all come kind of a part of the same story, even though they're all experiencing their own separate stories.
That was great. Thank you so much, Lisa and Don. There was so much in there to kind of process and digest, but one of the pieces that really was a highlight for me was the way you did this comparison of about transformation, basically, that how car hoods transforming into a natural element like a polar bear, how that can be a metaphor for how we all need to transform ourselves and our actions really in order to survive and ideally thrive. So that was really cool. Thank you so much. So that was a really fun tour, really inspirational to hear from all three of these projects. You know, even just these glimpses of videos and stories make me think a little deeper about things like consent and mental health and climate change. So it's fun to get that flavor of it today. And now we're going to bring back all of the artists to do a question and answer period. So if you have a question you'd like to pose to any of them, please use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I see a couple folks are already adding things in there. That's awesome. So good, we have all our artists back on. I'm going to start with a question for you, Bardia. Somebody has asked, why 13 sheep exactly? Is there any significance around that number?
Yeah, so there were 12, and somebody said,
okay.
Somebody said we need a black sheep, so it was 13. I mean, 12 obviously is a significant number, but there wasn't like, you know, anything beyond that.
Gotcha. And, you know, I'm curious to hear you explain a little bit more about why sheep, you know, why not like dogs or cows or something? Like, could you share more about that?
Yeah, sure. So to me, sheep are like at the bottom of the totem pole for like consent. They're like, as far as all the domestic animals that I can think of, you know, dogs, cats, they're like the most gullible. And nobody asks consent from the sheep ever. there are these mythical stories of lonely shepherds and sheep in the mountains and things like that. And who's going to ask sheep for their consent? And so it was basically like a kind of a great juxtaposition of the two ideas, that sheep were perfect for consent.
Yeah, I hear that. That makes sense. One other question for you while I've got you. Somebody wants to know where the sheep are today, and if there's any chance that if anyone can have a chance to interact with them.
Unfortunately, right now, because of COVID, there's no touching, there's no hugging.
Right.
So the sheep are just secured somewhere. They're like, some of them are in my bus, some of them are in a warehouse that I work with, some of them somewhere else. So they're spread out, but they're not out and about right now.
They're like grazing somewhere on a farm, like where no one can reach them.
With their masks on.
Yeah, okay, cool. Rebekah, I have a question for you about the project itself, Singularity, that it was a bird cage with a house inside, with a smaller bird cage with a smaller house inside. Someone's curious, how many layers were there? How did you decide on that number? And whether that house was based on an actual house in your life somewhere.
Really good questions. There are 6 variations, so 6 versions of the house, and the cage. So the tallest house was 25 feet, and it shrunk down to a house that was 1 inch, and the cage that was a little bit bigger than 1 inch. So that was kind of as far down as we can go. We could have went a little bit farther, but the smallest house had like a little light inside, so we really couldn't get that smaller. And then of course bigger would have just been too big. It would have been too much. And then as far as the house was concerned, the design of it was, I went back and forth with a lot of different designs. It's an interesting question because I often have like repeated dreams about my childhood house. I don't know if anybody else does, but it's not really based on that house, but just like the iconic, weight of the house design. I mean, it's a simple box house. So I think that's kind of more where the inspiration came from, like a kid's drawing of what a kid would draw a house to look like.
Right. Yeah. I drew houses like that when I was little. Yep.
Yeah, so
That's cool. That leads really well into a question that another person just asked. They said that Singularity and Church Trap were both houses, and houses have potent symbols, or they are potent symbols. And then what symbols will you draw upon for the Pandora's box piece?
Well, that one is like taking a life of its own. It's actually turning into a bunch of different mixed media pieces. I'm seeing it as so many different structures, not just large installation art pieces. I'm seeing numerous installation art pieces. I don't really want to like give away too much because it's changed, but I'm working a lot with like pills, actual pills, drug paraphernalia, the pill bottles itself. The structure, I don't know if I'm going to go back to like the house, box kind of structure for this one. I think I might actually, there's an idea that I came up with that it might be a lot way more organic. But I haven't really nailed down exactly what the big installation is going to be, because part of my issue is I can't burn it because it's plastic.
Right.
To burn it,
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think, how can this piece like tour? How can it get set up other places where it's just not going to be at Burning Man? It's got to go other places, maybe get set up in front of a pharmaceutical company or like something like that. So yeah, currently right now it's a bunch of mixed media, like smaller pieces, and then there's a couple of the installation pieces. So there's probably gonna be more than one installation with this particular project, because it's kind of turned into its own series by itself.
Cool. Yeah. Well, you have some time, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Don and Lisa, there's a question for you here. Bethany says, love the juxtaposition with the solar panels as well. I'm chiming in on my own thing. It was really fun to see those images of BlackRock Labs installing there. It was cool. And Bethany's question continues, were car hoods always the material of choice? And tacking on my part of the question, where do you source them? Is it easy to find them? How do you pick a particular color and only find white ones? Like, talk more about the car hoods.
Yes, and yes.
So the car hoods were always the material for us. We had done a number of animals prior to the bear with car hoods, very colorful animals. And one thing we noticed in the junkyards where we source these hoods is that white is the most common color of automobile. So there were lots of white hoods, and we kicked around the question for some time about what we could make with white car hoods, and a polar bear was a natural fit. There are 17 million cars produced every year. So less than every 2 seconds, a new car rolls off the assembly line.
Wow, globally?
Globally.
Oh my gosh.
And so, yeah, by the time I finish this sentence, there are, a dozen new cars in the world.
There's a lot of cars.
And cars, our transportation sector accounts for over 30% of our carbon footprint. And so literally the cars that we drive and the system of automobiles that we use is displacing habitat around the world. And so we really felt like taking these kind of relics of our carbon addiction and turning them into symbols of nature was a great way to kind of make that connection.
Yeah, the first car hood piece we made was actually a gorilla that was for a show in Philadelphia that was of artists that did recycled materials, and it was specifically a show for about habitat loss. And the thing that was striking is that literally animals disappear to make room for our cars. And so in terms of that kind of transformation piece, it kind of visually reverses the process. I mean, I know, it is just kind of for artists in the sense that, we want there to be more habitat, for these animals. But taking the cars and then turning them into animals, it kind of, just turned it upside down in a way that would be great to promote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that really distinct connection there. I think you spoke to that well. I think people see the polar bear and then they realize it's made out of car hoods. And really, I think the striking thing is part of the set and the setting. To see a polar bear in the desert in Black Rock City was like, oh, something's wrong. Polar bears don't belong in the desert. And then that's what kind of gets you thinking. Plus, you had that projection mapping on it that really gave that impression. And I'm curious, when you put the polar bear in other places, somewhere that's not the desert, like say, when I saw it in Toronto, it was like already in the snow. How does that work? Like, how do the different settings you feel affect the message?
Well, obviously, I think Burning Man, having it at Black Rock City was huge. And we certainly loved that it began its journey in that setting, because the environment added so much depth to the piece. Luckily the piece, it's 35 feet tall, so sort of wherever it goes, it kind of has a presence and sort of sticks out and doesn't quite seem to be at home or and for us also it's now been in 8 cities in the past 2 years, and for us the journey of the bear is very much part of the meaning. This is a bear that is traveling the world, looking for allies, looking for its people, and it's finding them. That's been so exciting for us, is that we've been to Canada twice, we've been across the US, and everywhere it goes, people really respond to the message. So
I can see that. I mean, it really is something. It's like, it's so well made. You see it and you can't help but be like, plus who doesn't love a polar bear? So yeah.
Well, that was kind of the thing. It is about trying to appeal to people on this real love way. And this word that I've just been falling in love with recently, it's called consilience. And it's basically this kind of, confluence of ideas from different
different realms, like say humanities and science kind of brought together. And the thing about the polar bear is, the message is that all life on the planet is interconnected, and what affects polar bears affects us. And so the consilience is really, whether you come to the conclusion that all life on the planet is interconnected from studying science or from studying religion or, like from a poem or something, that it all kind of leads to that one idea that all life on the planet is interconnected, and what happens to polar bears happens to humans.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think all of these pieces have a little element of that interconnectivity with all of them, Also, I couldn't help but think when you were like, we have all these white car hoods, what other animal could we make? I couldn't help but think of the sheep.
You right? Let's get together. We'll make giant sheep. I love it. It could be like a Trojan horse thing where people can come out of the sheep. It would be perfect.
And our bear, certainly, I would love for our bear to speak to people like Bardia's sheep.
Yeah.
Well, that leads really well into a question for you, Bardia, from Mary Jo. She would like to know, how do the sheep know when the line has been crossed regarding consent?
So they did have these touch sensors that could basically detect touching, and few of them together on the sides and on the back could detect people riding them. And so we had it set. We had 4 different actual states of the sheep. They're not touched, now they're touched, and now they actually give permission because there was a timer there that if you pet them enough, they would let you, and they would kind of go into this next state of saying, hey, hop on, let's go for a ride. And if you hopped on before that, they would say, hey, stop, what are you doing? You can't ride me. I didn't. Why are you all of a sudden? We're just talking. Why all of a sudden riding?
Hold on. Yeah, I didn't say. Yeah.
I didn't tell you. And one other thing was like they actually had. So that was the line that I was talking earlier. They had touch sensors on their privates. So God forbid if anybody touched the privates, they would. Oh my God, they would be so nasty.
That's a real line to cross. That's a legitimate place to draw the line. Yeah. Thank you. I'm also interested, Bardia, you mentioned a couple other previous projects around social change, like the one with the homeless or one with the hand or Me Too. Would you pick one of those and tell us a little bit more about one of them?
Sure. So the homeless project actually lasted the longest. It was about 3 years, and my idea there was to kind of, I've always wanted to. I've always been obsessed with Burning Man and the transformational things that happen to people, and I really wanted to bring that to the city. And so I was not a homeless activist at the time. I said, yeah, I'm gonna do this with homeless. And I found an organization, the street paper, that the homeless get. They're all over US, and basically went in there and started working with some homeless. And obviously, soon after that, I did become, this is what happens when you go in, even if you're not an activist, you become an activist when you learn about the issue. So I did become an activist. And so I basically had a school bus that we took around, and we made, with the help of the homeless, made art inside the bus, art outside the bus. Just the bus was basically our platform. And when we took it around DC and other places, people would come inside and kind of talk to the homeless about their art that was inside the bus. And then they would come outside, and we gave them markers to draw on the bus. And they all would kind of say something, draw something inspirational, projecting the future, a better future. And what I learned was like, you know, as soon as you touch the art touches you. That was so important. So as soon as they came out, or the moment they came out and actually contributed to the bus, it was done. Like the whole loop was closed, and they were impacted, and I was impacted.
Yeah, I bet. Wow. And you did that for a couple of years, you said?
It was more than a couple. Yeah, it was like 3-4 years in DC.
Wow.
Yeah. A lot of different projects there.
Huh. That's so inspiring, especially coming from the Bay Area here, where we've got such a big homeless population. It's always really moving to see people that are willing to get involved and work with that community. That's really
and this is a funny thing around that. So I was trying to raise money for the bus to do all these different things. And that year I had luckily gotten 2 Burning Man tickets in the lottery. I wanted to actually put those in a raffle. And that's a no-no. You know, you can't like sell your tickets for more.
right.
So I called Burning Man. So I sent an email to Burning Man. I don't know who responded, or I'm sure they had a discussion about this. And they said, sure, go ahead, raffle your tickets. So I actually made like $3,000.
Oh, that's great.
The project. Yeah, I was like, wow, Burning Man told me I could raffle my tickets. That was amazing.
I mean, that seems like a reason to make an exception in that particular case. Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, it's really neat. Thank you. And I feel really lucky that, you've done this work in all kinds of other places. Like, I appreciate that you brought it to Black Rock City too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I have a question now from Martin, who I would like all the artists to answer this one. And here's the question. It says, I'm interested in experiences of change. I'm wondering if any of the panelists have any stories they can share regarding changes in themselves or changes they've seen in other people as a result of their art. So let's go Rebekah first.
I'm so glad you asked that question, because it's a really, really important one, especially, for us artists making work out on the playa, because, we interact with so many people out there, and so many folks interact with our artwork. I have so many stories of folks coming up to me, either with Singularity or Church Trap, and telling me how much it impacted their lives, either through that they were raised in a cultish, family upbringing, religious upbringing, or with Singularity, they lost their dad too, and got to express that on the walls of the piece. I mean, as for myself, both of those pieces totally transformed me and changed me. Singularity definitely, was such a really, really hard piece to execute. And it definitely changed me as a person, and as an artist, it made me a lot more relaxed a little bit. Like, I just kind of let things go, because you're like, well, okay, so that's happening. And then you try to find the silver lining. It's like, oh, this was really bad, but this was really, really good. Yeah, that piece definitely changed me a lot. So yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate that one.
Yeah, cool to hear that. Thank you. Don and Lisa, would you like to share?
Yeah, our piece, Longview, it's of course about the climate and our carbon addiction, but it's also about imagination. And we are hoping to inspire people with this piece. Sort of, what we did was kind of a demonstration of the power of imagination. We got together with our little crew, we cooked up this crazy idea. It seemed wildly impossible, implausible, at times virtually impossible, but we did it, and it just sort of is proof to us. It's been really transformative for us personally, because we feel like very different people on the other side of this now. But we also were hoping to sort of show people that, yeah, just by putting your mind to it and being determined and pulling your community together, that you can affect change and make an impact. And so in some sense, the piece is very much about imagination. the other thing about Longview is our target audience in some ways were young kids. And I'm going to try to show
Oh
this
yeah, I can see it.
little polar bear drawing that a young person in Calgary did. We had a sort of a meet and greet day in Calgary with a variety of school groups, and the bear reaching young people was one of our big goals. And I, you know, it's hard to quantify these things, but I think just anecdotally, I think we were able to do that.
Well, and I think the question too of change that, you know, that comes from the panel or the attendees is that, yeah, you know, we're all desperate for drastic social change, especially around climate issues. There's all these young people who are, you know, I think leading the way, and there's sometimes that, you know, social change happens when you least expect it. It's like when the Berlin Wall came down, like one day, you know, you'd be shot if you took a brick out, and then one day you weren't, and nobody really can say when that day is going to happen. But what I do know from studying social movements, and Don and I used to, you know, teach about art and politics at the College of Santa before it closed, it's that sometimes there's just like a runaway freight train. And all of a sudden, things that were acceptable yesterday are no longer acceptable today. And we don't really know when that's going to happen. But we hope, you know, we believe that by like, you know, it seems crazy, but like, yeah, if we build a 35-foot tall polar bear out of car hoods, that somehow we're kind of contributing to that kind of cultural change where people are like, hey, polar bears matter. And the fact is that I've never seen a polar bear in the wild, and I probably never will, and that's fine. But I feel that if polar bears disappear from the planet, that you know, it just makes my soul just kind of a little smaller somehow. And I don't know why that is. But I think a lot of other people feel that. And that it becomes a part of this runaway freight train that we can't predict it, but it happens. You know, human consciousness evolves, and we can look back to whatever 100 years ago. People were like, "Oh, women shouldn't vote. That's crazy talk," you know, and you know, 100 years later, it's like, yeah, we definitely need to vote. So, you know, it is that I totally get that question of like, what are you doing that's really, you know, making the ice caps stop melting? And the truth is I have no idea how to make them stop melting, but we're hoping that there's little children out there and they will be able to please.
Right. I mean, anyone that sees the polar bear and starts getting those ideas and starts thinking about it as like, oh, this is a thing I'm doing. And I think, like you're saying, there's enough of that sort of snowballing that can happen where small changes start that build up into what become bigger changes. And yes, thank God for the evolution of our consciousness in some ways. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And now, Bardia, I'm curious if you could share a little bit about if you have any stories of the impact your work has had in terms of change.
I changed myself. Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned the homeless bus. It really changed me, my view, my understanding. I still have friends, you know, after all these years that are homeless, and I'm part of that community now. I'm not homeless myself. I've never been homeless, but I really am part of that community, and I feel all the pain. I am so aware of all the pain and all the issues and all of that. So it's definitely changed me.
Something I like that stood out for me in your video too was not just like, you know, we think about the impact that it has on people who experience the art on the other side of it. But you're talking about the conversations that you had with your crew and all the, you know, the big, deep, kind of gnarly talk about where do we draw the line and how does that work? Like there's so much of kind of a cauldron of conversation of change that happens in that I didn't really think about until you explained it that way. So that was really cool too.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was a large community, and I love, this is one of the other quotes that I always have, that I sometimes make good art, but it becomes magical when other people come and join and participate in the process of making that. And I'm not just saying this, it's happened over and over and over again, that the team, and as an artist, I'm always open for input from contributions, discussions. So when the discussion happens, I don't set the rules, I just facilitate as the lead artist, and just things happen, just magical things happen. It's amazing.
Yeah, so much synergy. I love seeing that. That's one of the main things you see happen with Burning Man art, right? Like the way that communities come together around this, and
exactly, just
that's a
makes
neat
the
thing.
magic, because
Yeah.
one person, in my opinion, cannot. So
Cool. Well, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I'm sorry to say that we have to wrap up now, but it's been such a treat to spend this time together. And before we close, there's just one quick resource I want to share. I mean, there's so many resources around social change and creativity, but I wanted to share that Burning Man Project has been collaborating with this cool organization called the Wellbeing Project. They're a global initiative that's working on the issue of inner well-being and personal care for folks who work in the social change sector. So I'll put a link to that organization in the chat, the Wellbeing Project. But it's also just a reminder that if you are working in this field, if you consider yourself a change maker or put your heart and soul and effort into helping others in the world, remember to take the time to care for yourself, you know, especially now when things can feel so hard. It's really important to take care of ourselves. So I want to wrap up by saying a big thank you to all of the artists. It's already quite a feat to bring artwork to Black Rock City, and you guys today, you all show how you've gone above and beyond by working to advance important causes, generate awareness, inspire action. It's, you know, people say make the world a better place, is like, it sounds a little bit trite, but I mean, seriously, I can see how you all are doing that, and it's really moving. So thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your stories today. And to everyone that joined us today, a big thank you, huge, sincerely glad to have you here with us. Thanks for attending, for supporting the artists, and for whatever ways you are doing work to support social change. If you have any feedback about the event, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at artspeaks@burningman.org. And there is more art in your future with the next episode of Art Speaks. It's coming up on 11/11 at noon Pacific. The theme is, it's called Desert Athenaeum, the Art of Playa Libraries and Learning. So we'll hear from a series of artists whose BRC artworks were inspired by teaching and learning and the power of books and storytelling. So you can register on Kindling, and the link for that's in the chat. And lastly, the work our team does year-round to support these artists is part of the larger mission of the Burning Man Project, which is a nonprofit. So if you feel moved to support us, we would truly appreciate it. We've got just about a week left of our big community campaign to save Black Rock City so we can return to our beloved city. So I just invite you to, look at the positive impacts that Burning Man has had on today's guests, on their crew, as we just talked about, all the stories they told of the impact it had in the world and their stories of change, the lives they touched really with their messaging. So, we have 400 plus art installations come every year. So you think about the ripple effect of all the impact that's happening. And so it's just very important work that I think we're doing that's very meaningful, and we need your help to keep it going. So fortunately, we have this generous donor right now who is matching donations made by this Friday. No amount is too small. Please check out donate.burningman.org. And again, a big thanks to you for joining. Have a great rest of your evening. Thanks again so much, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.